Welcome to RANEPA Expert Talks. I'm happy to introduce you a special guest of today, Paul Revay, an expert on international affairs, a trustee of Friends of Europe. Good afternoon, Paul.
Thank you for your welcome.
Yeah, so let's start with the Trust of Friends of Europe. What has been done, what have you achieved for those 10 years for which the Trust had been operating?
So, Friends of Europe, just to present to you, Friends of Europe is a Brussels-based think tank. As you are well aware, there are many think tanks in Brussels, but I would say that Friends of Europe has a little something special to it, in as much as it wants to address directly the citizenship in Europe and wants to focus more directly with dialogue with the citizens. And basically, its three approaches are connect, debate, and change. This is our motto. And working on connect, debate, and change, we have tried to go outside more academic work, outside academic thinking, and try and come into the direct contact with the young and the less young in Europe.
All right. So, well, thank you for sharing your goals and mission. But basically, what are the achievements and what are the goals? And are they connected somehow with Russia?
Well, to start off, we have refocused our attention since a few years on the concept of Europe Matters. This program, which we call Europe Matters, is important as it wants to show that Europe should not be taken as a given, and many of our current problems come up with this taken for granted that we see in Europe, especially among the young. So what we try to do is to re-energize the Europe debate in our different member countries, as well as in the Brussels bubble, because it is sort of a bubble, and try and explain that fighting for a greater and stronger union is an everyday work which cannot be simply left behind. Turning to your question on Russia, obviously Russia is for us an important element of our work. I would say that Russia, over the past years, Europe has had problems over our common continent, but at the same time, we want to find a way out of these problems and try and reconnect also through track 2 diplomacy. You have heard about the concept of track 2, non-official, non-formal ways of continuing this dialogue in difficult times. Times were maybe better yesterday, but surely they will become better tomorrow. So for today, we need to get down to addressing certain areas where we can agree, maybe to disagree, but still to agree. So this is the work of on the Russia front within Friends of Europe. To be honest, the Russia component of our work is often linked through the lenses of security and diplomacy. So we now need to work more on the economic factors and others also. Some of them are difficult, like sanctions, obviously, but still there's a lot of work to be done, and we look forward to doing this also at RANEPA within the Gaida Forum. And we are now, for the second year, setting up a special session at the Gaida Forum in January on EU-Russia relations, with the subtitle basically from Lisbon to Vladivostok, can we still work together, and how can we work together? So you see here a practical way of linking our work and our ideas also within the RANEPA framework to a future on Europe-Russia relations.
Yeah, well, that's a very good news about this dialogue and about that the Trust will be actually leading one of the sessions at the Gaidar Forum in 2020. So are you going to take part in one of the sessions?
I will be more a coordinator of this session, but we have excellent speakers who are scheduled to come. It will be co-moderated by Igor Jurgens here in Russia, and by actually the founder and chairman of Friends of Europe in Brussels, Giles Merritt. So we will build a panel with senior Russian think tankers and also former politicians in Europe, such as Franco Frattini from Italy will come. We hope to have also from Germany, from France, and from other countries. So I would say basically this should be a good dialogue to try and find a niche where we can discuss important issues for Europe and for Russia at large.
You've been to RANEPA before, and you've been doing like public lectures. So what's your impression on RANEPA students and how was it perceived? And can we discuss this sphere of your activities?
Definitely, it has been, first of all, a real pleasure to be able to give a few lectures, which I continue to give for bachelor and MA students on international relations. First of all, these are held in English, in the English language, and I was astonished to find how good the young Russian students speak English. So you have an excellent, I would want to say, way of teaching languages here in Russia. It was well known since many, many decades and years, but here I can witness that, which makes our lives, of course, much easier. But secondly, I found these discussions with the students very enlightening in as much as they are very open-minded. They have, of course, access to international information, and they are very critical in a positive sense, but very critical on developments within and outside their country. So this makes it for a good discussion with the students. And thirdly, the students, I would say, are very nice in the sense that they show willingness to listen, to hear, and open themselves up to the lecturer, which is also refreshing because in some parts of Europe it's not always the case. So basically my experience up to now has been more than positive, giving lectures to these young students.
Right. You've been talking about your experience in EU and what else, and are there any lectures during this visit to Moscow?
Yes, definitely. This time I will be continuing to focus on the issue of climate change, because this is one area where Russia and the European Union can work together, because we have similar goals, we have similar ambitions. Sometimes the ways of reaching the agreements on the Paris COP task may be a bit different, but still the idea is that we need to find this approach in a more concrete way. It is a climate urgency, and this climate urgency is felt especially in the younger generations throughout all of Europe, of course Russia included. So I thought this was a nice and important and topical subject to be able to continue to discuss here at RANEPA.
Yeah, we've touched it a little bit, but anyway, I want to stress it and just to get your opinion on the difference between generations. Well, you give a lot of lectures across Europe and Russia, so what would be your assessment of young people, let's say today and maybe 10 years ago? What's different? What gives you hope and probably what doesn't?
Well, I mean, to be young and to see young people and to work with young people is always a big hope, and it gives, of course, big hope, because they are, by definition, banal, is what I'm going to say, the future. What gives me hope is their open-mindedness. I mean, I would say often in all generations there has been, of course, open-mindedness in younger generations, but especially today I find them very open-minded to different ideas, to different fields of work, and to different approaches. The only concern I would have, which is shared by many, is it is a little bit a zapping generation. I mean, the social media tools, the technology allows, of course, for a lot of inverted commas zapping, Sometimes it might be a bit difficult to get them concentrated on a certain number of issues. So that is the only aspect where I feel we need to be a bit more traditional in the way we work with our students to ensure that they remain focused on a subject and don't zap immediately into others. But in general, it's very interesting to fuse the new social media tools with the education system, but we're still at the beginning on how to find a proper balance. So that's what makes it so exciting to give lectures today.
Totally agree with you. Have you heard, I mean, while being in contact with different students, have you heard any ideas that you were thrilled of or kind of, let's say, flabbergasted maybe? I mean, with the new approach or with new eyes. I mean, when young people have all this technology in their hands and they have understanding of, let's say, climate change goals. Do they combine them? Have you heard about, I mean, have you met such projects, such students?
No, of course, through, for example, discussions within the Students' Club, which is a nice initiative that was launched recently. The worldview of the students are utterly comparable to their comrades and colleagues in other parts of Europe or the world. So there, I wouldn't say that there's any difference in Russia compared to other parts of the world. I do my lectures, or I focus my lectures more on EU-Russia relations in general, because I strongly feel that Russia is a European country, both from its history, its culture, its literature, its paintings, and for me, Russia belongs to the European cultural sphere. So I feel it's always very interesting to ask my students how they feel, for example, on the East approach, looking east, go east. Is the Eurasian approach something that is maybe a way for Russia to look into the future? And I try to explain to them that I don't feel this approach. I only see two ways for Russia to go ahead. It's either to go it alone, but you can't go alone in the 21st century, or to revert back into some kind of a pan-European cultural, economic and beyond spectrum. So this type of discussion is something which is very interesting to discuss with the younger generation, and which leads to quite some hefty and sporty discussions sometimes.
Yeah, it's kind of cross-fertilization, let's say.
Exactly. No, exactly. So that's what university is here to do. Exactly.
Let's talk about internationalization of education with all this globalization, and the EU is, of course, is a good example of international education for students, for residents of Europe. So what's your vision of future development of it?
Well, from a European vantage, young students that come into university in Europe, as you are aware, have the possibility of, within the European Union, of, as you say, cross-fertilize in other universities through the Erasmus program. It is often said that the current generation of students is called often the Erasmus generation. So this has benefited immensely to furthering the European project on unification, and has made young Europeans or young nationals have become young Europeans. Now this example of Erasmus is now also applicable to Russia with the Erasmus Plus program. So meeting my young students here at RANEPA, I tell them, don't forget that you also have possibilities of doing a part of your studies in the European Union, that there is this Erasmus Plus program to which you could benefit, and I very strongly urge you to do so, all the more so as RANEPA is increasingly a university with many, many associate universities in Europe, and not just in Europe, by the way, worldwide. So you are lucky students to be here at RANEPA, because this gives you an open window to the world in order to further your studies abroad.
So, and a few more questions. So, what will be the most important lesson, like life lesson, which you got while, being a EU person, while giving lectures, while meeting students, while raising your family, etc., etc. So, can you please share it with us?
Well, I think it's not very difficult to find a proper response. I would say it's the human contact, the human touch. You can have, I worked a lot before in international organizations, and I would say meeting high-level people, but in the non-profit sector, not in the official sector. And I noted one thing, that you can have the best files that you can prepare for your minister or for your leader, but if the human contact does not work with the vis-a-vis, then the whole file will sort of disappear onto the shelves. So that is, of course, something very positive in a certain way, because the human touch aspect is central. On the other hand, you need to prepare the files, which means that you have to do a lot of work to make sure all the elements are in the file. So that does not mean that the file should not be well prepared. So to find this balance between human contact, human empathy, and also the facts on the ground or factual issues, this balance is important to find, and I think that is one of the lessons I learned in my years of assisting leaders in their international affairs.
What would be your advice to yourself, let's say when you were 20 years old? What would you do in a different way, probably, or just looking back?
Well, that's a tough question. But I think one is, well, for me it wasn't very, for me my interest in international affairs was always there, also in my days at school, at the lycée. So I was a lucky man to be able to join through my university and afterwards my work, international affairs. So I was definitely very lucky in this sphere. But the advice would be to try and find your gut feeling of what you would like to do and to stick to it. Again, not zap too much. Try and stick to it. You can always make a mistake, of course, but you can always come back and go in another direction. But I would say it's stamina and consistency once you have taken a decision, and broaden, of course, but stick to it and don't zap.
Well, that sounds like a good advice, actually. Thank you.